At my daughter's rehearsal dinner, her fiancé accidentally spilled red wine on my head. She said I was being too dramatic, so I quietly left and took the big gift with me. The hall was glowing with golden light that evening, chandeliers swaying gently as if they too were laughing along with the crowd. I sat at one of the tables near the center, my back straight, my hands folded in my lap. It was Lisa's rehearsal dinner, the night before her big day, and I had thought that perhaps tonight I would be able to simply sit quietly, smile, and watch my only daughter glow with happiness. The room smelled of roast beef and roses, and everywhere people were lifting glasses of wine and champagne, laughter rising like smoke. I was not used to such fancy settings, but I had dressed my best, the same navy dress I had saved for important moments. I did not want to embarrass my daughter. When Matt stood to speak, everyone turned to him with that kind of admiration that young people in tailored suits command. He raised his glass, his tie perfectly knotted, his eyes gleaming with pride. He said something about love, about tomorrow being the happiest day of his life, and the guests clapped politely. Then, in one fluid motion, he stepped closer to me, and as though by accident, he stumbled. I gasped from the shock of the cold liquid and reached for a napkin, but none came. The laughter that followed was sharp, not nervous or apologetic, but cruel. A woman at the next table whispered loudly, "Old people should sit out of the way. Why is she even in the middle of this?" Another chuckled. "Too old to be mingling like this. She wants to act important." I sat frozen, humiliated, while the sound of giggles echoed. Lisa, my daughter, turned to me with a frown. Instead of rushing to my side, instead of asking if I was all right, she narrowed her eyes and said sharply, "Mother, please, do not make a scene. It is just wine. Do not be dramatic." Her words sliced through me more than the liquid running down my back. For years I had worked my hands to the bone for that girl, and here she was, rolling her eyes at me in front of strangers as if I were some spoiled child seeking attention. Matt smirked, as if he had achieved exactly what he wanted. He looked down at me and muttered with false innocence, "Oh dear, the old lady is too sensitive. Honestly, being allowed to sit here should be an honor for her." His voice carried just enough for the surrounding tables to hear, and they laughed along as if it were part of the evening's entertainment. Then his mother leaned across the table, her voice dripping with disdain. "If it were my decision," she said loudly enough for all within earshot, "I would have put you in the kitchen. That is where you belong. The bride should not be burdened by appearances that make people uncomfortable." She glanced at Lisa, who did not defend me, not even once. I could feel the eyes of 50 people on me, every single one staring not with compassion, but with a mixture of amusement and pity. No one moved to help. No one handed me a napkin. No one said Matt should apologize. The wine clung to my scalp, dripping onto my shoulders, making me shiver under the air conditioning. The smell of it was sour and heavy, filling my nose with humiliation. I kept my hands folded, refusing to wipe my face in front of them. I would not give them that satisfaction. Inside, though, I burned. My chest tightened with every chuckle, every sneer, every cruel glance. I wanted to shout, to demand respect, to remind them of who I was and what I had done, but I bit my tongue. The silence was heavier than any words I could have spoken. My daughter looked away, embarrassed not by her fiancé's cruelty, but by the sight of her wet, humiliated mother sitting at the table like a fool. The waiter passed by and hesitated for a moment, his eyes meeting mine with a flicker of sympathy, but he kept moving when he caught Matt's glare. Even kindness was stifled here. But not everyone looked away. Behind the service counter, the young restaurant manager, a girl no older than my own daughter had once been, watched with quiet concern. She did not laugh. She did not sneer. When I finally stood to leave, she slipped a small folded napkin onto the edge of the table, her hand barely brushing mine. It was the only human gesture of dignity I received that night, so small most people would have missed it. I did not. I would remember her face. I realized at that moment that this was no accident, no clumsy misstep. This was a performance, and the audience was in on the joke. Someone at the far table called out, "Do not worry, she probably cannot taste anything anymore anyway." Another voice followed, "Maybe she should be grateful. Wine costs more than water." The laughter that followed was deafening. I sat there, drenched, my dignity stripped in front of my daughter and her future family. My heart pounded in my chest, not from rage alone, but from the deep ache of betrayal. I had given everything I had to Lisa, raised her on my back when the world turned its back on us, and here she was, siding with them, choosing their comfort over her own mother's dignity. The chandelier's crystals sparkled above me, mocking in their brilliance, while the stain on my dress spread deeper, darker. I felt the chill seep into my bones, but I did not shiver. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me shake. I simply sat there, quiet, enduring the sting of their laughter, the sting of my daughter's indifference, the sting of being treated as less than human. As the conversations picked back up, I realized no one had even bothered to address me. I had been reduced to a prop in their evening, an object of ridicule, a reminder of what they believed Lisa had outgrown. My heart was breaking, but my face remained calm. This was the moment. This was the beginning of something they would never see coming. While they laughed, I memorized every smirk, every word, every sneer. I let the humiliation sink into me, not as weakness, but as fuel. They thought I was nothing but a tired old woman, too sensitive, too dramatic. They thought I had no power, no voice. They believed I would fade into the background, embarrassed, silenced, irrelevant. But what they did not know, what Lisa had forgotten, what Matt would soon regret, was that my silence was not surrender. It was the sound of patience sharpening itself into something far stronger. My quiet exit would not be a retreat. It would be the first step in showing them exactly who I was and reminding them that even an old woman, drenched in wine and ignored, could command the room in her own way. That night, as I sat soaked and shamed, my heart did not break. It hardened. The humiliation became a vow, and though none of them knew it yet, the rehearsal dinner that was supposed to be their triumph had already become the prologue of their undoing. When I think back on the years that led us here, I wonder how a daughter can forget so quickly the things her mother endured to raise her. I remember every hour I spent working 2, sometimes 3 jobs, my body aching and my eyes burning with fatigue, all so Lisa could have the kind of life I never had. While she slept peacefully in her bed, I was folding other people's laundry, scrubbing floors, and working late-night shifts at a convenience store, counting coins so she could have notebooks for school and a warm coat in the winter. I told myself that none of it mattered if it meant she would grow up proud, strong, and grateful. For a long time, I thought she was. I never remarried after her father passed away. His wedding ring sat in a small box on my dresser, the last piece of him I had. When the time came to plan Lisa's wedding, there were whispers, suggestions, even direct remarks from Matt's family that I should sell the ring to contribute more money to the celebration. Lisa, my own child, looked me in the eye and said, "Mom, it would mean a lot if you did something symbolic, something to show you're not holding on so tightly to the past." I told her gently that I could not part with that ring. It was the last connection to the man I loved, the man who gave me her. Her response cut me to the bone. "You're being stingy. Matt's parents say you're being selfish. You could help us so much, but you just want to cling to old junk." Yet only a week later she came to me with a contract, asking me to put the studio deposit for her wedding photos under my name because my credit was better. Suddenly I was not stingy anymore, I was useful. I signed because she was my daughter, but in her tone I heard no gratitude, only expectation, as if my entire purpose was to open my wallet when asked. The same thing happened with the car. Matt wanted a sleek sports car to make a statement, something he said would reflect his status. He asked me to co-sign the loan. I refused. I explained that I could not take that risk on my limited income, that at my age I could not afford to jeopardize what little stability I had left. Matt scoffed in my face, saying, "You're holding us back. You don't want us to succeed. You're a roadblock to our future." Lisa stood by his side, arms crossed, echoing his sentiment. "Mom, why can't you ever just support me?" I said nothing, but inside I thought about how many nights I had supported her. With food she never saw me skip, with bills she never knew I delayed, with shoes I bought for her even when mine were falling apart. And still, despite refusing the car, when the invoices for the rehearsal dinner came, Lisa forwarded them straight to me. "Just handle this, Mom," she said dismissively over the phone, as if I were some household servant, not the woman who had given her life. I paid, because I could not bear the thought of her being embarrassed in front of her friends, though the money came from the little savings I had intended for my old age. It was not only about money, it was about dignity. I suggested inviting a few of my old friends, the people who had been there in the hardest times, who had slipped me groceries or money for gas when Lisa was small. They were part of our survival story, and I wanted them to share in her joy. Lisa's reaction stunned me. "Mom, no, I don't want those kinds of people at my wedding. They don't fit the image. This is not some charity dinner. You'll ruin the atmosphere." Her words struck like blows. Those kinds of people, that was her way of talking about the very souls who had kept us alive. But nothing compared to the small, almost invisible betrayals that accumulated over the years. When Lisa was a little girl, she used to wear the sweaters I knit for her with such pride. She would tug at her friends' sleeves on the playground and say, "Look, my mom made this just for me." Her eyes would shine, and I would feel, for a brief moment, that maybe all the exhaustion was worth it. Years later, when she was in college, she found one of those sweaters in her closet. She wrinkled her nose, tossed it into the trash, and said coldly, "These look cheap. Do not let anyone see them." I stood there, my hands trembling, unable to speak. It was not just a sweater she threw away. It was hours of my life, nights of sore fingers and aching eyes, the love I had woven into each stitch. Every time I tried to show her that love in some small way, she twisted it into shame. Every time I protected what little I had, she painted me as selfish. Every time I tried to stand tall as her mother, she cut me down until I felt like nothing more than a bank account walking on two legs. The truth became undeniable. To Lisa, I was not a woman with a heart and history. I was not the mother who had sacrificed her youth for her survival. I was a purse, a checkbook, a resource to be tapped when convenient and dismissed when inconvenient. In her eyes, my presence was a liability, my love an embarrassment, my sacrifices invisible. That realization was the second cut, sharper even than the wine poured over my head. It was the knowledge that to my daughter, the very person I had bled myself dry for, I was not a mother anymore. I was a wallet with gray hair. I was tolerated, not loved. My seat at the table had been bought with dollars, not earned with respect. That was the moment it struck me. A deep, burning clarity. My motherhood had been erased, replaced by a transaction. They wanted my money, but not my presence. They wanted my labor, but not my love. They wanted me invisible, useful only when it suited them. And in that recognition, painful as it was, a new resolve began to stir in me. They thought they could erase me. They thought they could strip me of dignity and silence me with shame. But they would soon learn that the woman they dismissed as too dramatic was not finished yet. If I was nothing but a wallet in their eyes, then I would show them the price of underestimating me. I rose from my chair slowly, carefully, as though the weight of the wine in my hair had made me heavier. I did not argue, or shout, or weep. Instead, I reached down for the small velvet box I had brought as my gift, a deep red that matched the stain now seeping into my dress. I clutched it to my chest and picked up my handbag. No one tried to stop me. No one even noticed. They were too busy laughing, too busy basking in the glow of each other's cruelty. The marble floor gleamed under the light as I walked out of the banquet hall. My shoes clicked softly, the sound drowned out by music and chatter. I could still feel the eyes of a few guests on my back, but no one followed. To them, I was nothing but an old woman leaving in embarrassment. In truth, I was walking away with something far more powerful than they could imagine. At the reception desk, the young manager looked up in surprise. His eyes flicked to my damp hair, my stained shoulders, but he said nothing. He had seen enough to know what had happened. I leaned forward slightly and spoke in a calm, low voice. Check, clause 12.2. The benefactor was publicly humiliated. His eyes widened for a fraction of a second. Then he nodded briskly. No questions. He understood. I left the building without another word. That night I lay awake in my small house, the box still clutched against my chest. My hair smelled of wine, the sheets carried the sour scent of humiliation, but I felt something stirring inside me that I had not felt in years. Power. Quiet, invisible power. They thought they had mocked me into silence, but they had signed their undoing the moment that wine spilled down my face. By morning the storm broke. Calls poured in, not to me, but to them. The caterer first, then the florist, then the photographer. Each one the same. The contract was void, The deposits, my deposits, were being returned. Clause 12.2 of every agreement was clear. If the primary benefactor was publicly insulted, the services would be cancelled immediately, with all funds refunded to me. I imagined the panic on Lisa's face when she realized. I pictured Matt's fury when he discovered that the wedding he had boasted about, the wedding he wanted to flaunt like a trophy, had crumbled in less than a day. The news spread like fire through dry grass. One by one, every pillar of their carefully planned spectacle fell. The venue withdrew. The band sent a curt email. The photography studio delivered a copy of the signed contract with my name at the top, circled in bold. I did not answer the phone when Lisa called. I let it ring, her name flashing again and again, until at last the messages came through. Her voice was shrill with panic. "Mom, what did you do? You cannot do this. You are ruining everything." A second message followed, Matt's voice breaking with rage. "You crazy old hag. You think you can humiliate me? You've just destroyed your daughter's life. No wonder nobody respects you." Later, when I finally did see them, it was everything I had imagined, and more. Matt was pacing, his face red, his tie loosened as though even fabric could not restrain his fury. He pointed a shaking finger at Lisa and shouted, "Your mother is insane? Stupid! I should have known she would ruin this, and you cannot even control her." Lisa, my beautiful daughter, the child I had carried and protected, turned to me with eyes filled not with compassion, but with venom. "Mom," she said through clenched teeth, "how could you? Are you really so bitter that you would try to sabotage me? Do you want to destroy the happiest day of my life?" I stood there silently, watching as they unraveled. For years I had been their quiet support, the invisible backbone of Lisa's every success. And now, with one sentence at a front desk, I had pulled away the foundation of their glittering illusion. They thought my silence was weakness. They were wrong. In less than 24 hours, their perfect wedding had collapsed into chaos. The grand affair they had dreamed of, the one that was supposed to cement Matt's status and Lisa's pride, was gone, stripped away not with shouting, not with threats, but with the quiet execution of a clause they never even bothered to read. That was the first crack in their empire, and as I looked at their red, furious faces, I realized I felt no guilt, no sorrow, only clarity. This was not revenge. This was justice. This was dignity reclaiming its rightful place. The rehearsal dinner had ended with me soaked in red wine and laughter. The very next morning it was their turn to drown, and the night before the wedding had become the night their carefully curated world fell apart. The collapse had only begun. The morning after the contracts collapsed, while Lisa and Matt were scrambling to salvage what remained of their wedding, another blow arrived. One they could not sweep away with money or apologies. The young waiter from the rehearsal dinner, the only soul in that room who had dared to offer me even a shred of kindness, had quietly recorded the moment the wine spilled. His phone caught the details that everyone else chose to ignore. Matt, smirking as he approached, the deliberate pause, the slight tilt of the glass, and the unmistakable satisfaction in his eyes as the wine cascaded over my head. For a moment, before feigning his stumble, Matt had even looked sideways at his friends and winked. It was not clumsy chance. It was cruelty staged for laughs. The waiter, disgusted by what he witnessed, uploaded the clip into a private group that included some of the staff and, unfortunately for Matt, a few distant relatives who had attended the dinner. Within hours, it spread. First cousins, then uncles, then grandparents saw the evidence. By noon it had crossed into the wider family chat, bouncing from phone to phone, carried by disbelief and whispers of shame. When Matt's mother saw it, her face drained of color. She had laughed along that night, of course, but laughter is easy when no proof lingers. Now, there it was, frozen forever. Her son-in-law-to-be grinning as he humiliated me, my daughter's voice chuckling as though my pain were entertainment, and the guests chuckling as though my pain were entertainment. She covered her mouth, but the words escaped anyway, sharp and clear. "This wedding is a disgrace, an absolute disgrace." For Matt's family, the damage was not only moral but social. They prided themselves on image, on standing tall in the community, but suddenly people in town were whispering in the grocery store, at church, on street corners. The clip leaked onto a local Facebook group, then into the hands of a small online newspaper hungry for scandal. "Future groom humiliates bride's mother at rehearsal dinner," became the headline, and beneath it, a screenshot of Matt's smug expression as I sat dripping in red wine. Lisa's phone exploded with calls and messages, some from friends, some from colleagues, some from people she barely knew. The story spread like wildfire, and with every share, her shame deepened. I know because even though she did not call me directly, I heard from neighbors that she was seen crying in her car outside the florist's shop, phone pressed to her ear, shouting at Matt to fix this. But how could he fix what had been laid bare for everyone to see? The truth was no longer my quiet memory or the staff's silent pity. It was public record, immortalized in pixels and watched again and again with outrage. And yet, when I finally saw Lisa and Matt together, the truth did not free her, it trapped her. Lisa's eyes darted between me and Matt, torn between the man she thought she loved and the evidence of his cruelty. Her lips trembled, but instead of acknowledging what the whole world now knew, she clung to him, defending the indefensible. I realized then that she was not blind to the truth, she was terrified of it. To admit Matt's cruelty would mean admitting her own failure, her own blindness in choosing him. Pride chained her to him more tightly than love ever could, and fear of the community's laughter, fear of being the bride abandoned before the altar, kept her standing at his side even as the ground gave way beneath her. "It was just a joke," she muttered, though her voice lacked conviction. "People are overreacting. He did not mean it like that." Matt, cornered, lashed out like a cornered animal. "Everyone needs to calm down," he shouted. "It was a prank. You people are pathetic if you cannot take a joke." His arrogance only deepened the disgust around him. Lisa tried to stand tall beside him, but her hands shook. Deep inside, she must have realized what the video showed. She must have felt the sting of betrayal, knowing her fiancé had chosen to publicly ridicule her own mother on the eve of their wedding. Yet pride chained her to him. Pride and the fear of humiliation. For me, there was no fear left, only clarity. Tau Tru 4 came not in their words, but in the silence that followed each replay of the clip. Neighbors whispered, colleagues frowned, and strangers shook their heads. The tide of sympathy shifted to me, the quiet, humiliated mother whose only crime was showing up to support her daughter. And in that shift, the scales began to balance. The truth had been unmasked, not by my voice, but by the lens of a phone and the conscience of one young man brave enough to share what he saw. Matt's cruelty was undeniable, Lisa's silence unforgivable. And my role in their story, once mocked, was finally seen for what it was. A mother wronged in the most public of ways, and for the first time in a long while, I no longer felt alone. The world saw, and the world judged them. The scramble to save their wedding was desperate and frantic. After the contracts collapsed and the video went viral, Lisa and Matt rushed to secure another venue. They poured money into last-minute arrangements, clawing together vendors who were still available, convincing themselves that throwing more cash at the problem would erase the stain of humiliation. They found a hotel ballroom just outside town, smaller and less glamorous, but Matt insisted it would do. "People will forget once they see how spectacular the actual day is," he told Lisa, puffing out his chest like a man still in control. I stayed silent. I did not offer to help. I did not extend a hand. They had not asked anyway. My name was no longer welcome in their plans. They thought the worst was behind them. They believed they had weathered the storm. But storms have aftershocks, and theirs was waiting for the exact moment when the eyes of every guest would be upon them. On the day of the wedding, the hotel lobby filled with guests in gowns and suits, whispering about the scandal but still curious to see if the ceremony would rise from the ashes. Lisa was pale, her mascara already smudging before she even walked down the aisle. Matt was sweating, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. They were holding everything together with threads. Then came the call. Just as the staff began setting bottles of champagne on the bar, a representative from the alcohol distributor walked briskly into the room, a clipboard in hand. His voice was calm, but it cut sharper than any blade. "There is no permit for alcohol service at this event. Without a valid liquor license, we cannot provide or pour any wine, beer, or spirits." The words landed like stones in a quiet pond. At first, no one seemed to grasp what he was saying. Then the ripple spread. Heads turned, murmurs rose. A guest whispered, "What do you mean, no drinks?" Another asked, "How does a wedding not have a license?" I stood at the back of the room, watching Matt's face lose all color. He knew exactly what it meant, because tucked inside that velvet box he had seen me carry out of the rehearsal dinner was not jewelry, not money, but the completed file for the liquor license transfer. That was my intended gift. A permit, already approved, ready to be placed in his name, the key to his dream of opening a bar with Lisa after the wedding. Without it, they had nothing, and I had withdrawn it days before. Matt's jaw clenched. He grabbed his phone, calling frantically, pacing in his tuxedo. Lisa followed him, her heels clicking across the floor, her voice rising. "Matt, what's going on? Fix this." He turned on her, hissing, "It's your mother. This is her doing. She pulled it. She destroyed everything." I did not flinch. I did not speak. I simply watched. Within minutes, the fallout began. The bar closed its shutters. Waiters walked away with unopened bottles. The guests grew restless, whispers turning into complaints. A few of the more prominent families, the kind Matt had wanted so badly to impress, left altogether. Without music, without wine, without laughter, the ballroom felt like a funeral, not a wedding. Then came the press. A photographer from the local paper had already been circling, waiting to document their comeback wedding. Instead, his camera caught Lisa in tears, mascara running, clutching her bouquet as though it could keep her from collapsing. He snapped Matt mid-rage, shouting into his phone, his fist clenched so tightly that his knuckles went white. The next morning, those photographs were plastered across social media. "No liquor license for groom's big day," blared one headline. Another was crueler, from toast to tragedy, the wedding that couldn't serve wine. Even Matt's family, who had stood by him through scandal, began to retreat. His mother, who once mocked me, now whispered to her relatives, "The bride's family brings nothing but bad luck. This union is cursed." The same woman who had sneered that I should sit in the kitchen now pointed her finger at Lisa, claiming she had brought shame into their household. Lisa's eyes met mine once across the ballroom, red and swollen, filled with a desperation I had never seen before. For a brief moment, I thought she might run to me, collapse into my arms and admit the truth. But instead, she turned back toward Matt, still clinging to him as if holding on would somehow undo the disaster unraveling before her, and so the spectacle reached its peak. The grand wedding that was supposed to be their victory had become their downfall. Not in whispers, not in rumors, but in the most public way possible, with guests walking out, newspapers snapping photos, and the entire town shaking its head. Tro 5. Their celebration ended not with vows of joy, but with humiliation broadcast for all to see. The wine they had poured on me at the rehearsal dinner had come back to drown them on their wedding day. I never intended to keep everything for myself. I had never lived for wealth or for power. All my life, the little I had went to Lisa. Even now, even after the humiliation, the betrayal, and the scorn, I could not imagine hoarding what I had left. But I could choose differently. I could choose to give my gift, not to the ungrateful, but to someone who had shown me a small act of humanity when no one else had. That person was the young woman who had slipped me a napkin on the night of the rehearsal dinner. She had not laughed with the others. She had not turned her eyes away. She had simply placed the folded cloth in my hand, her touch light, her expression gentle, as though she understood what no one else did, that kindness costs nothing and dignity should never be denied. Her name was Caroline. She managed the restaurant with a seriousness beyond her years, working double shifts to keep her staff in line, always moving, always tired, but never unkind. A week after the wedding collapsed, I asked her to meet me at a small cafe in town. She looked nervous, probably assuming I wanted to discuss the refund of my deposit. Instead, I slid an envelope across the table. Inside were two things: the signed transfer for the liquor license and a bank slip for a modest but meaningful sum of money. She stared at them, her eyes wide, her mouth slightly open. "Mrs. Layla, I don't understand," she stammered. "You were the only one who saw me as a person that night," I told her. "The only one who thought I deserved a shred of dignity. You didn't know me, but you offered kindness. I would rather see these go to someone who values people more than image, someone who will build something honest." Her hands trembled as she held the papers. Tears welled in her eyes. "I don't know what to say." Say nothing, I replied softly. Just build something good. And she did. 1 month later, the little downtown street where old shops had closed their doors now had a new sign above a refurbished brick building, the Velvet Oak, a small bar cozy but elegant, with polished wood counters and warm lighting that drew people in from the chilly Massachusetts evenings. I had invested quietly, not for profit, but for purpose. My name was not on the door, but my fingerprints were in every detail. On opening night, Caroline stood behind the counter, dressed in black and white, her hair pulled back neatly. She raised a glass to the packed room of neighbors, friends, and curious townsfolk who had heard whispers about the new place. There's someone I need to thank, she began, her voice steady though her eyes glistened. This bar would not exist without the generosity of a woman many of you already know. She is not just an investor, she is the reason I believed this was possible. Mrs. Layla, would you please stand? All heads turned toward me. I had chosen a seat near the back, hoping to remain unnoticed, but the applause carried me forward. Slowly I rose, my cheeks warm, my heart tight in my chest. Caroline continued, her voice breaking slightly. If it weren't for her, I would still be working endless shifts, saving pennies, never daring to dream. She gave me a chance when she didn't have to. She reminded me that kindness matters. To me, she is the person I respect most. The crowd cheered, glasses lifted in unison. I felt tears prick my eyes, but they were not the tears of shame I had swallowed at that rehearsal dinner. These were tears of recognition, of dignity restored. In the corner of the bar hung a wooden plaque with gold lettering. It read, Layla, Guest of Honor. The sight of it nearly brought me to my knees. For the first time in years, I felt seen, not as a burden, not as a bank account, but as a human being whose worth could not be measured in dollars or appearances. The local paper came the next morning. A photograph of Caroline and me side by side graced the front page. The headline read, New bar opens with backing from local retiree, a story of kindness and respect. The town that had once whispered about my humiliation now whispered about my strength, my quiet vengeance, that came not through spite, but through generosity. Meanwhile, Matt and Lisa had nothing. Their wedding was remembered only as a scandal, their reputations in tatters. Investors who once courted Matt now avoided his calls. Lisa had retreated into silence, ashamed but unwilling to confront the truth. They had poured wine on my head, mocked me, dismissed me as irrelevant, and yet, here I was, standing tall in a place where kindness was honored and cruelty had no foothold. Choutro 6 was not the destruction of their wedding. That had been easy. It was this moment, standing in a room filled with warmth, watching someone worthy rise because of my choice. It was the balance restored, the justice delivered, not by rage, but by giving what they did not deserve to someone who did. And as the bar filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and music that wrapped around me like a soft embrace, I finally allowed myself a smile. This was victory, not just over them, but for myself, for the woman who had been drenched in wine, dismissed and laughed at. Now my name was etched on a wall, not as a joke, but as a legacy. The headline stared back at me from the front page of the town paper. Young entrepreneur's wedding collapses after liquor license disaster. Below it was a photograph of Lisa in her gown, streaked with tears, clutching her bouquet as though it might hold her together. Beside her, Matt was caught mid-shout, his face contorted with rage, his fingers stabbing the air as if he could bully the world into silence. The article was merciless. It spoke of incompetence, humiliation, and the ripple effect of the viral video that had already made them a laughingstock far beyond our small Massachusetts town. The very image they had built their lives upon had crumbled in a single weekend. For a week, I heard nothing from Lisa. Not a call, not a message. I assumed she was buried under the rubble of her ruined marriage, ashamed to face me. I thought perhaps she would vanish entirely, letting pride carry her away from me for good. But one evening, as I sat on my porch with the cool breeze rustling the trees, I heard the familiar crunch of her car pulling into my driveway. She stepped out, her shoulders hunched, her eyes swollen from crying. She looked younger somehow, stripped of the hardened mask she had worn for so long. For a moment, she just stood there, clutching her purse like a child with a security blanket, before walking slowly toward me. When she spoke, her voice cracked. "Mom, please," she whispered, tears spilling down her face. I need you. I was wrong. I shouldn't have treated you the way I did. I shouldn't have let him. Her words trailed off into sobs. Finally, she lifted her gaze to mine and said the words I had waited years to hear. I'm sorry. Please help me. I studied her face, the desperation etched into every line. My heart, despite everything, ached for her. She was still my daughter, still the little girl who once ran to me with scraped knees and bright eyes, but the wounds she had inflicted were not the kind that healed with time alone. This was not about comforting her. It was about teaching her the weight of her choices. I rose slowly, went inside, and returned with a single sheet of paper. I laid it on the small table between us, the ink bold and clear. She blinked at it, confused, then looked up at me. This is what it will take, I said, my voice steady. If you want to repair what you've broken, if you want me to believe you again, these are the terms. She picked up the paper with trembling hands and read. A public apology to me, your mother, for the disrespect, the mockery, and the betrayal. Not whispered in private, not mumbled behind closed doors, but spoken where others can hear, the way your insults once were. A public apology to the waiter who filmed the truth. Without him, the world would still believe your lies, and I would still be nothing more than the butt of a cruel joke. A public apology to Caroline, the manager who showed me kindness when you refused. She has more honor in her than you showed in all your years as my daughter. And one more thing, I added as Lisa lowered the page with trembling hands. You will begin family therapy. Not for me. For you, to understand what it means to carry another person's sacrifices instead of dismissing them. To learn how to see me as more than a wallet with gray hair. Her lips quivered, her tears dripping onto the paper. Mom, that's humiliating. No, I said firmly. That's accountability. The same kind of public accountability I endured while sitting in that banquet hall, with wine dripping down my hair, with laughter clawing at my dignity. If you want forgiveness, it begins with humility. For a long moment, she said nothing. The silence stretched between us, heavy and raw. At last, she nodded, pressing the paper to her chest as if it were both a punishment and a lifeline. I did not embrace her. I did not rush to soothe her tears. Those days were gone. Instead, I returned to my chair and let her stand there, caught between shame and the first steps toward redemption. I had not shut the door entirely. I had left her a path back to me, but it was narrow, steep, and paved with the humility she had spent years refusing to show. If she chose to walk it, she might find her way home again. If not, then she would live with the consequences of her pride. That evening, after she left, I sat alone on the porch as the sun slipped behind the trees. The cicadas sang, the wind whispered through the leaves, and for the first time in a long while, I felt peace. Justice had been served, not through shouting, not through vengeance, but through truth, exposure, and the demand for respect. Lisa had come back to me broken, and perhaps one day she would rise with grace. But whether she did or not, I knew this. I had reclaimed my dignity. I had shown them all that silence is not weakness. Sometimes silence is the sharpest blade of all. The evenings in Massachusetts have a way of wrapping themselves around you like a quiet hymn. That night, after all the storms had passed, after Lisa's tears and Matt's rage had faded into memory, I sat alone on my porch as the wind whispered through the trees. The boards beneath my rocking chair creaked with each gentle sway, the sound familiar, steady, almost like a heartbeat. The sky above me burned in shades of amber and violet, the kind of sunset that makes even the most battered soul pause and breathe. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine from the woods beyond my yard. My silver hair caught the light of the sinking sun, strands glowing gold, as though the years of sacrifice had finally been gilded by time itself. I rested my trembling hands on the arms of the chair. They shook with age, with years of work, but they were steady in their purpose. For so long, those hands had folded laundry until the skin cracked, scrubbed floors until the knuckles bled, held Lisa through fevers and heartbreak. Tonight, they held only peace. I thought of her words at the rehearsal dinner, the ones that had cut deeper than the wine soaking my scalp. Mom, do not be dramatic. She had tossed them at me like scraps, as though my pain were nothing more than theater, as though my humiliation were an inconvenience to her celebration. I let those words echo in my chest, and then I answered them in the silence of the dusk. You said I was dramatic, Lisa, but it was you who turned your life into a tragedy. It was you who forgot who carried you when the world wanted to drop you. It was you who chose to side with cruelty instead of kindness. The porch light flickered on as the shadows stretched longer, moths dancing against the glow. I leaned back, letting the chair cradle me as I looked at the horizon. For years I had believed that justice required shouting, that one had to fight loudly to be heard. But I learned something in the ashes of Lisa's wedding. Justice does not always roar. Sometimes it is a whisper carried on the wind, sharp and undeniable. Sometimes it is a quiet step away from the table, a single clause in a contract, a velvet box carried out of the room. Justice does not need to scream, I murmured aloud, my voice low but certain. It comes in silence, measured, patient, and always on time. I smiled then, not the smile of triumph alone, but of release. The weight I had carried for decades, the invisible burden of being used, dismissed, humiliated, had lifted. I had not thrown it off in anger, but set it down gently in the hands of fate, trusting that time would reveal the truth. And it had. The world now saw what I had known all along, that dignity cannot be bought, and cruelty never goes unpunished. Matt had lost his image, his investors, his pride. Lisa had lost the illusion that she could rise by standing on my shoulders while silencing my voice. They had both learned that tearing down another person, especially the one who had given them everything, always leads to their own collapse. In the weeks that followed, I saw them only through whispers. At the grocery store, neighbors turned away when Lisa walked past. At church, no one saved a seat for her. Matt tried to stride through town with his usual arrogance, but people's eyes cut sharper than knives. They were not cruel, only cold. That is the punishment of a small town. It never forgets. And their laughter, once so loud at my expense, had turned against them tenfold. But more than their fall, I remembered Caroline's rise. I thought of her bar, the Velvet Oak, glowing warmly on that downtown street. I remembered the plaque with my name engraved, Layla, Guest of Honor. It was a small piece of wood, but to me it was a monument. Not to wealth, not to revenge, but to respect. For once, my name had not been spoken with pity or annoyance, but with gratitude, and that meant more than any grand wedding ever could. As the evening deepened, I could almost hear the laughter from that bar drifting through the air, mingling with the crickets and the rustle of the trees. Laughter that did not sting but healed. Laughter born from kindness, not cruelty. I clasped my hands together, still trembling, but strong enough to hold the memory of what I had reclaimed. My silence had been mistaken for weakness, but in truth it had been my greatest weapon. They had laughed while I sat drenched in wine, believing I was defeated, but silence was my shield. Silence was my blade. I thought again of Lisa, of the paper she had clutched with tear-streaked hands, outlining the apologies and the therapy I demanded. I did not know if she would find the courage to follow through, if she would humble herself enough to rebuild. That was her journey to take. Mine was finished. I had done what I needed to do. I had drawn the line and reminded her that being my daughter was not an entitlement. It was a privilege. The cicadas sang louder as night fell, a chorus of resilience. The rocking chair groaned beneath me, steady as ever. My chest rose and fell with calm breaths, no longer heavy with the weight of betrayal. For the first time in years, I was free. I lifted my gaze to the first star that appeared in the indigo sky and whispered softly, "They thought they silenced me. But silence is not absence. Silence is power." And as the cool wind brushed my cheeks, I let the corners of my mouth turn upward. A smile, not wide, not boastful, but firm and knowing. In that moment, I understood fully the quiet strength of an old mother, ignored and underestimated, is the most enduring power of all. They had laughed at me. They had mocked me. They had poured wine on my head and called me irrelevant. But here I sat, bathed in golden light, my dignity intact, my justice delivered, and my silence louder than any of their voices could ever be. And so, the sun set on their illusions and rose on my peace. If my story touched you, if it reminded you of your own strength, or of someone you love who deserves respect, I invite you to stay with me for more. This is just one of many memories I've kept locked away until now. Subscribe to Grandma True Stories and join me here on this porch, where the past still speaks and silence finally finds its voice. Because sometimes, when a grandmother tells her truth, the world listens.